She returned a lost wallet without taking a single dollar, never knowing the owner was a guarded tech billionaire who would fall in love with her honesty. Riley, a woman who had every reason to stop believing in goodness, made one quiet choice that would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, truth, and herself. What happens when sincerity meets guarded wealth? When two broken hearts decide to trust again? This is not just a love story. It's a reminder that one honest act can change everything. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow soul-stirring stories for more heart-deep tales. Riley Morgan tightened the strap of her canvas tote and stepped out of the library into the fading light. The sky above Charleston was soaked in the warm orange of early dusk. Soft streaks of pink brushing across the horizon like a half-finished watercolor. Her shift had dragged. Too many patrons, too little patience, and now her feet throbbed in her worn boots with every step. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and hit speed dial. "You better not be eating ramen again," she said into the receiver, weaving through the sidewalk crowd. "Technically," her younger brother Jamie replied, voice muffled by chewing. "It's cup noodles with an egg." "Gourmet, really?" She rolled her eyes, but smiled.
"That's not real food."
"You're not my mom," he shot back playfully, then softened. "But, seriously? Rye, don't take the alley through Madison." Hitting dark. "I'm fine," she said. "It's faster. And my legs are killing me. Just be careful." She didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, lifting the edge of her scarf, carrying with it the scent of roasted peanuts from a nearby cart. The ache in her shoulders settled deeper. "I'll talk to you later," she murmured and hung up. Her shortcut turned quieter with each step, the bustle of the main road slipping away behind her. She walked alone now, the rhythmic click of her heels echoing off brick walls. A paper wrapper skittered across the sidewalk, chasing dry leaves. The alley ahead wasn't ominous, just still, quiet. That's when she saw it. A wallet lay, half-concealed, beneath a discarded newspaper near the curb. Black leather, gleaming faintly in the streetlight like it didn't belong there. Riley paused, glancing around. No one in sight. Not a single pedestrian, no parked cars, no joggers or dog walkers. Just the dim glow of city lamps and the breath of early evening chill. She crouched and picked it up cautiously. The leather was smooth, high-end, expensive. Definitely not the kind you'd find at a thrift store or corner market. She flipped it open. Cash, lots of it, pressed neatly into the folds. 50s, hundreds. A sleek black credit card. The kind she'd once seen in a finance blog labeled invitation only. Caleb Westwood. The name rang familiar in the way only wealth does. A whisper in news articles and headlines she rarely paid attention to. A business card slipped behind the ID read, Westwood Ventures. No phone number, just an email and a downtown address printed in minimalist font. She sat on the edge of a nearby planter box, the wallet heavy in her hand. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but from weight, moral weight. This could be a week's rent. 2 even. And no one saw her pick it up. She looked up at the dusky sky, a canvas of peach and indigo. The world kept turning. No sirens, no moral guide swooping in, just her and a choice. Riley had been here before, not with a wallet, but with trust, with choosing what's right when it never seemed to matter. A boyfriend who drained her savings and vanished. A coworker who smiled sweetly while stealing her ideas. A job where she stayed late, unpaid, and unseen. Doing the right thing felt less like virtue and more like voluntary heartbreak. She stared at the money again. Then, with a slow breath, She snapped the wallet shut. "Not who I am," she muttered. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't pure. Back in her tiny walk-up apartment, she set the wallet gently on the kitchen table. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and old pages. She opened her laptop, fingers hovering. Then she typed, "Subject. Found wallet." "Hi, I found a wallet on Madison Alley belonging to Caleb Westwood. I didn't take anything. Please let me know how I can return it." She stared at the message, then hit send. She didn't know it yet, but that one act of quiet honesty would unravel everything she thought she knew. About wealth, about love, about herself. The reply came early the next morning, crisp and sterile, from an assistant whose name Riley didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "Re-found wallet." The body of the message was equally impersonal. "Dear Ms. Morgan, thank you for your message. Mr. Westwood has authorized retrieval of the item. Please deliver the wallet to our downtown office between 10:00 a.m. and 4:00 p.m. today. Ask for Clara at the reception desk. Regards, Westwood Ventures." That was it. No thank you for your honesty. No warmth. No curiosity about how she found it. Just cold logistics. A transaction. Riley read it twice, blinking through the early light pouring in from her kitchen window. The wallet still sat on the table where she had left it, as if it had grown heavier overnight. She stared at it for a long moment, then sighed. She didn't know what she'd expected. Maybe a simple acknowledgement, not a red carpet rollout, just something human. Still, she dressed quickly, pulled on her cleanest blouse and black jeans, and tied her hair into a neat knot. The train into downtown was half empty, filled with briefcases, coffee cups, and the kind of shoes she could never afford. She kept the wallet zipped in the inner pocket of her coat the whole way there. The building that housed Westwood Ventures rose like a mirror-polished monument to the sky, all sleek edges and tinted glass. She walked through the revolving door and into an atrium that smelled faintly of citrus and corporate efficiency. The woman at the front desk didn't look up as Riley approached. "I'm here to return a wallet," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I was told to ask for Clara." 14th floor, the woman replied, still typing. "She'll meet you there." The elevator ride was silent and sterile, each floor blinking past with quiet judgment. When the doors opened, a woman in a tailored cream pantsuit was already waiting, glancing at her watch. She looked Riley over quickly but not unkindly. "You must be Morgan," she said briskly, holding out a hand. "Thank you for coming." The wallet? Riley pulled it from her coat and placed it into the assistant's hand. "Everything's in there," she said. Clara nodded once, then handed over a small white envelope. "Mr. Westwood asked me to give you this. A token of appreciation." Riley froze for a second. "I didn't do it for a reward." "It's standard," Claire replied, her voice flat. "We appreciate your time." There was no conversation after that. No further pleasantries. Riley took the envelope, not wanting to make things awkward, and stepped into the elevator again. As the doors closed, she opened it. Crisp $100 bills, a thick stack, neatly folded, impersonal. She exhaled sharply and stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls of the elevator. The young woman staring back looked smaller, somehow. Diminished, not because she hadn't been paid, but because she hadn't been paid, but because, in some inexplicable way, she felt like she'd just been erased. She stepped out into the street. It had started to rain. Umbrellas bloomed around her like dark flowers as people rushed past, busy and dry. She had no umbrella, but she didn't care. Her coat soaked quickly, her hair clinging to her face. The envelope was still in her hand. She paused at the edge of the sidewalk, the city humming with its usual apathy, then walked calmly to the nearest trash bin and dropped the envelope inside. Gone. No one noticed, no one applauded. No dramatic music played, just the steady patter of rain soaking her shoulders, making her feel every ounce of her own weight. She curled her fingers into her damp pockets and crossed the street, her steps slower now. It wasn't about the money. It was about feeling invisible, about realizing that even a good deed, done in silence, had become just another task on someone else's schedule. Maybe Jamie was right, she thought. Maybe people like me just end up wet. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that 13 floors above her, behind a wall of glass, Caleb Westwood had been watching. Caleb Westwood stood motionless in his private office, arms folded tightly across his chest, eyes locked on the security footage looping across his sleek wall-mounted monitor. He hadn't been planning to watch. Normally, he let Clara handle things like lost items. Efficient, transactional, no need for unnecessary involvement. But something about the tone of Clara's report, her quick mention that the woman had refused to keep the cash, had stirred a reluctant flicker of curiosity in him. So he asked her to pull footage, just to see. He watched Riley enter the building. No hesitation, no nervous glancing around. Just quiet determination in her posture, like she had better things to do than return someone else's fortune. He watched her hand over the wallet without drama. No performance, just the truth. And then he saw the envelope leave Clara's hand, saw the way Riley accepted it. Reluctantly, like it burned in her fingers, she turned and left. He fast-forwarded, watched her walk out into the street as the rain began to fall, watched as she paused at the trash bin, and watched, with no small amount of disbelief, as she calmly dropped the envelope inside and walked away without looking back. Caleb leaned back in his chair, stunned, not with suspicion, but with surprise. People didn't do that. Not in his world, not without cameras or consequences. And definitely not with that much money at stake. He replayed the moment again. Her face didn't show pride or satisfaction. It wasn't theatrical, just tired and honest, and strangely full of quiet strength. The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, but leaves a mark anyway. It stayed with him longer than he expected. Later that week, he found himself standing outside a small bookstore tucked away on a tree-lined street, a few blocks from the university. No security guards, no car waiting. Just him and the memory of her voice in the message she'd sent. He didn't know what he was expecting. An answer, maybe, to why he couldn't stop thinking about a stranger who'd walked away from something nearly everyone else would pocketed. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. The place was modest. Wooden shelves, slightly warped with age, corners stuffed with reading chairs and mismatched cushions. The scent of old paper and fresh cinnamon hung in the air, mingling with the soft hum of a classical station playing somewhere behind the counter. He paused near the entrance, brushing drizzle from his coat sleeves, scanning the space. And there she was. Near the back, her back turned, restocking a display of poetry books with quiet focus. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, a pencil tucked behind one ear, sleeves rolled up as she shifted hardcovers with care. She didn't notice him right away, and he didn't call out. Instead, he wandered slowly to a nearby shelf, pretending to browse while stealing glances from the corner of his eye. She finally turned. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice polite, not overly friendly. "Professional." He turned toward her, offering a small smile. "Actually, yeah, I was hoping for a recommendation. Something thoughtful, but not too depressing." She tilted her head slightly, considering. Literary fiction, memoir, poetry? Surprise me. She studied him, not recognizing his face or name, and he liked that more than he wanted to admit. After a beat, she pulled a slim book from the shelf and handed it to him. The Remains of the Day. It's quiet, she said, but lingers, kind of like regret. He took the book, running a thumb over its weathered spine. Is that your pitch? I'm not much of a salesperson, she replied with a half shrug. I'm getting that, he said, a faint smile pulling at his lips. She raised a brow, slightly amused. You're not from around here, are you? Guilty, he said. Business trip. Sort of. Sometimes I just like walking into places where no one knows who I am. Her posture relaxed slightly, just flicker. That's rare these days. He looked at her. Do you think being anonymous makes people more honest? She hesitated, then said, maybe it just makes them braver. He tapped the book gently against his palm, watching her. Do you think good people always finish last? That gave her pause. Her eyes searched his for a moment. Why, you ask? Let's say someone does the right thing, he said quietly, but no one thanks them. No one even notices. Was it still worth it? Riley glanced away, thoughtful. When she looked back, her voice was softer. I think whether it's worth it isn't the question. The question is, can you live with yourself if you don't? Caleb stilled. She went on gentler now, as if speaking from memory. Getting hurt for doing the right thing. It happens, I know. But lying to yourself, or hurting someone else to protect yourself, that kind of damage doesn't fade, even if no one else ever knows. He didn't reply. He couldn't. Rain tapped softly against the front windows, and for the first time in a very long time, Caleb Westwood felt like he wasn't made of steel and silence. He felt, and that scared him in the most beautiful way. Caleb kept returning to the bookstore, at first telling himself it was for the books, then maybe the peace. But by the third visit in a week, he stopped pretending. He came for her. Riley never treated him like anyone special. She didn't gush when he walked in. She didn't fawn over his designer coat or subtly scan for status. She offered him tea if it was slow, a book if he lingered, and sometimes, when the radio played softly and the city outside dulled to a hum, questions that made him think harder than any investor ever had. You don't strike me as someone who reads poetry, she said once, handing him a slim volume of Mary Oliver with worn edges. He gave a small smile. That obvious. She shrugged, teasing but gentle. Just a guess. But maybe you're the kind of person who needs it the most. He didn't argue. Their conversations grew, not louder but deeper, like roots stretching quietly beneath the surface. They talked about obscure movies, dog-eared books, the kind of rain that made people nostalgic, and whether kindness was a strength or a risk. One gray afternoon, Caleb sat at the little table by the window with a steaming cup of herbal tea she'd handed him without asking. Riley was nearby, shelving a stack of used hardcovers with sleeves rolled up, her fingers brushing dust from spines with quiet care. A loose curl slipped over her cheek, and he couldn't look away. You always seem so steady, he said, his voice low. Like the world doesn't shake you. She laughed softly without turning. For years, he tilted his head. What happened? She paused, her hand resting on a faded copy of A Farewell to Arms. I was engaged once, she said simply. He was charming. Smart, good with words, until he wasn't. Caleb waited. He emptied my savings account 3 weeks before the wedding. Said it was for a business deal. Disappeared the next day. Silence. Not awkward, but respectful. Listening. I lost everything, she continued. Money, trust, direction. She picked up another book, carefully adjusting it on the shelf. But I promised myself I wouldn't let it turn me bitter. I couldn't control what he did, but I couldn't control what he did, but I could control who I chose to be after. Caleb's throat tightened. She smiled faintly, still not looking at him. So, no, I don't trust easily. But I also don't let pain decide my values. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed long after the world outside had quieted. Caleb had been taught to expect betrayal, to weigh motives and always calculate return. But she had every reason to close off, and yet she still reached for kindness like it was something sacred. He didn't tell her who he really was. Not yet. Because when she looked at him, she didn't see a CEO, a name in bold headlines, a net worth. She saw a man asking quiet questions in the poetry aisle. She made him feel normal, real, like he could put down the armor he'd worn for so long and not be punished for it. One morning, he arrived earlier than usual. Riley was outside, arranging a small wire rack of secondhand paperbacks on the sidewalk. Across the street, an older man sat hunched over on a crate, a cardboard sign resting against his knees. Just hungry. Caleb stayed back. Riley disappeared into the shop and returned with a brown paper bag and a bottle of water. She crossed the street, knelt beside the man, and handed him the items with both hands. Her touch was light, her smile genuine. She didn't look around to see if anyone noticed. No cameras, no Instagram post, just kindness without performance. Caleb's chest tightened. She walked back across the street, brushing hair from her face as if nothing had happened. She hadn't seen him, but he had seen everything. He whispered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, "She does good because she doesn't know how not to." That night, he reopened an old journal he hadn't touched in years and wrote one sentence with trembling clarity: "I don't know what this is yet, but I don't want to look away." The little cafe on the corner of Rose and Temple had mismatched chairs, cracked tile floors, and a menu written in looping chalk. Riley loved it for all the reasons most people wouldn't. Because it was quiet, because no one rushed, because it felt like time had politely stepped aside and let the world breathe. She sat beneath a striped yellow umbrella with Caleb, a pot of mint tea steaming between them, sunlight slipping through the trees and warmed apples. Their conversation drifted from favorite authors to movies that had made them cry, to those that made them laugh inappropriately at the worst moments. For a while, everything felt suspended. Simple, light, effortless. Like nothing outside that little table mattered. Until it did. A loud voice broke through the ambient hush of clinking cups and quiet conversation. Caleb Westwood. It boomed, cheerful, and too familiar. Riley turned as a man in a fitted blazer and designer sunglasses pushed through the crowd with a grin. He approached their table like he owned the sidewalk. "I almost didn't recognize you without your usual entourage," the man said, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. "What, the CEO of Westwood Ventures is standing in line with the commoners now." Caleb's smile flickered. "Hey, Leo!" Riley's breath caught. She blinked at Caleb. "CEO!" Leo didn't seem to notice the shift in air. "Anyway, don't forget the donor dinner next week. We need your speech to seal the deal." Then, just as quickly, he was gone, off to find his espresso and more people to impress. Silence dropped between them like a stone. Riley stared at Caleb, her eyes wide, searching his face for denial, a correction, some explanation. None came.
"So it's true," she said quietly, pushing her chair back.
He stood too, panic chasing his voice. "Please, let me explain." But she was already shaking her head, stepping away. "I need air." She didn't look back. She walked quickly, arms crossed tightly across her chest, breath shallow. She didn't stop until the cafe was out of sight. Caleb didn't follow. Not then. Not that day. Not when she left his messages unread, his calls unanswered. But on the third night, just as she was locking up the bookstore, she stepped outside and found him standing there. No coat, just a gray hoodie, and that look on his face. The one that said he wasn't sure he deserved to be there, but he had to try anyway. "You lied," she said softly, barely above the rustle of leaves in the wind. "I didn't tell the whole truth," he said, just as soft. "Is that what we're calling it now?" He didn't flinch. "I didn't do it to hurt you, Riley. I did it because I didn't want to be that guy. The one people only see for what he has." She crossed her arms, her voice unsteady. "You were the first person I let in, Caleb. Because I thought you were honest. Because I thought you were just normal, safe." "I know," he said. "I've spent most of my adult life surrounded by people who smile because of my bank account, who use charm like currency. I got tired of never knowing who was real." "So you lied to see if I was." Her voice cracked, and that cut deeper than anything else. He took a small step forward, hands open. "You were the first person in years who treated me like I mattered without knowing my last name. I didn't want to lose that." She looked away, blinking hard. "I'm still me," he added, his voice breaking. "The man who asks for book recommendations and drinks tea he pretends to like. The man who watches you hand a sandwich to a stranger and realizes he's never known real generosity." She met his eyes, confused, hurt, but still listening. "I'll go if you want me to," he said, stepping back. "But I needed you to know I didn't come into your life with some plan. I stayed because around you. I didn't have to pretend." He turned, started to leave. She didn't stop him. Not right away. But her heart clenched in that space he left behind, torn between every instinct to protect herself and every part of her that had started to believe again. The envelope appeared early Saturday morning, slipped under the bookstore door before Riley had even arrived to unlock it. The shop was still dark. The strop was still dark, the street outside washed in the pale blue of dawn. She noticed it as soon as she pushed the door open. A cream-colored envelope resting neatly on the welcome mat, her name written across the front in careful, slanted handwriting. No company logo, no printed return address, just Riley. She hesitated, heart already bracing, before picking it up and carrying it to the front counter. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Something about the stillness of it, the intimacy of it, made her chest tighten. She slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting was his, neat, unpolished. "Riley, I grew up in a house where people wore suits to dinner and said I love you the way they said grace. Out of habit, not feeling. My mother died when I was 10. My mother died when I was 10. My father taught me how to win. But no one ever taught me how to be kind without expecting something in return. We didn't practice sincerity. We outsourced it. So I built walls. Success became armor. Control became comfort. And then one day I lost a wallet, and someone returned it without taking a single thing. No name. No expectation, just decency. You shook something loose in me, not because of what you gave, but because of what you refused to take. If you never want to see me again, I'll understand. Truly. But if even a small part of you believes I meant every word I said, please, don't stay silent. Caleb. Caleb. She read it again, and then a third time, slower, her fingers trembling slightly at the corners of the page. She folded the letter with the same care she imagined he had used to write it and slipped it into her coat pocket. She didn't text him that day, or the next. But on the third day, she sent him a single message. Saturday, 8:00 a.m., no suits. He responded with only a heart and a simple, "I'll be there." At 5 minutes to 8, Riley waited in front of the bookstore with a paper bag of steamed buns in one hand and a mischievous glint in her eye. When Caleb rounded the corner, he wore a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers. His hair was still a little damp, like he hadn't bothered with a blow-dryer, and he looked, finally, like a man without a title. "No bodyguards," she teased. He grinned, sheepish, left them all in the penthouse. "Good," she said, handing him the bag. "You're spending a day with me now. No headlines. No hiding." Their morning began at the open-air market, a jumble of folding tables and plastic stools, smells of sizzling meat and ripe mangoes thick in the air. Riley moved through the stalls like she belonged to every inch of it, haggling with vendors for fun, handing an extra banana to a toddler when his mother wasn't looking, greeting old ladies who sold bundles of herbs as if they were cousins. Caleb followed a step behind at first, uncertain. But when she handed him a warm cup of soy milk and said, "Don't read about it. Just drink," he laughed, really laughed. After breakfast, they stopped by the city library, where Riley volunteered on weekends. She introduced Caleb to the librarian as a friend who needs to learn how to whisper properly. He spent the next hour reshelving donated books, sneaking glances at her when she wasn't looking, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear as she read call numbers aloud. In the afternoon, they visited a children's shelter tucked behind a row of faded apartment buildings. Riley was greeted like a returning hero. Children threw their arms around her waist. Volunteers lit up at the sight of her. Caleb stood back at first, overwhelmed, until a shy little girl with oversized glasses offered him a sticker. He knelt and drew a cartoon cat with her, so terribly lopsided it made her giggle behind her hands. Later, they sat on a low curb outside, eating grilled corn and sticky rice as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. "I always thought I had to be impressive," Caleb said, his voice softer now. "The smartest, the richest, the one who had everything under control." "And today?" she asked, brushing salt from her fingers. He looked at her, quiet and sure. "Today," he said, "I feel like I'm just alive." And for the first time in a long, long while, so did she. They didn't call it anything, not at first. It was just an idea, something Caleb mentioned while they sat on that same bookstore step where their paths had first crossed. The idea sparked between them like a match, quiet between them, like a match, quiet but insistent. What if they could create something bigger than themselves? Something that honored the people who did good for no reason other than it being the right thing? Riley had looked at him, her brows knit thoughtfully. People like the janitor who turned in a briefcase full of cash and lost his job for causing unnecessary attention. Or the waitress who paid for a stranger's meal and got reprimanded for breaking policy, Caleb added. Or me, Riley said with a soft shrug. Returning a wallet that could have changed everything, only to feel invisible. Caleb had nodded, and from that quiet conversation, True North was born. It started with just the two of them, and a handful of late nights at her tiny apartment. Riley sketched out ideas on napkins and notepads while Caleb built out the framework. Legal, financial, sustainable. They argued over names. Caleb pushed for structure. Riley insisted on soul. Somehow, they met in the middle. They used his resources, her vision, and both of their hearts. The mission was simple: to support people who did the right thing even when no one noticed. Especially when no one noticed. especially when no one noticed. They created a grant program for quiet acts of integrity, housing referrals for those who had been punished for speaking up, job placement services, and just as importantly, letters, handwritten letters of acknowledgement and thanks, sent to people who had never heard "we see you" before. They rented a small office tucked above an old bakery in the historic district, sunlight pouring through the windows and the smell of fresh cinnamon always in the air. Caleb insisted on no corporate marble, no plaques, just wooden floors, open desks, and a wall covered with Polaroids and stories. A woman who returned a diamond ring found in a gas station bathroom. A kid who turned in a wallet he found on a park bench. A teacher who used her own money to buy textbooks and never told a soul. Each face became a page in a living book of goodness. For Caleb, it was a kind of transformation. The world he had built his empire in valued strategy and results, rewards and returns. But here, with Riley by his side, he was learning a new metric: sincerity. He watched her move through the foundation with the same quiet grace she had in the bookstore. She didn't run things from a podium. She sat with people, listened, wrote every thank you card by hand. One afternoon, he caught her laughing with a teenage girl they'd helped place in an internship program. Riley handed the girl a small journal and whispered something that made her eyes shine. Caleb stood at the doorway, arms crossed, just watching. He felt something inside him shift. Again. It wasn't the grand moments that changed him. It was these, the soft ones. The ones that didn't make headlines but made meaning. That evening, as they walked home, Riley said, "You know what I love most about this?" He looked at her. What? It's not about saving the world. It's about reminding it that kindness still counts. He stopped and took her hand. "You remind me of that every day." She smiled, tired but glowing. "You remind me I don't have to do it alone." A year passed. And on the first anniversary of True North, they didn't hold a gala or throw a fundraiser. They returned to the place it had all started, the bookstore. The shelves had been polished, the walls painted honey gold. A cozy corner had been transformed into a reading nook filled with donated blankets and beanbags. But its heart remained the same. Riley greeted guests at the front with warm tea and cinnamon rolls from next door. Caleb stood beside her, no suit, just a sweater, and the kind of grin that lingered long after a conversation ended. They didn't make speeches. They just stood in a circle of friends, volunteers, and a few of the people they'd helped. Each one carrying their own story. Each one carrying their own story, each one a thread in the tapestry they were weaving together. And when the sun dipped low and soft jazz played in the background, Caleb looked across the room at Riley and knew. This wasn't just a foundation. It was a home they had built from a single act of honesty. Brick by brick. Heart by heart. The bookstore felt like a warm pocket of the world that time had chosen to be kind to. Sunlight filtered through the windows. Catching on the hanging plants, Riley had coaxed back to life. The reading nook she'd created was filled with quiet laughter and the soft sound of pages turning. Caleb stood behind the counter, helping a child pick out a book with a hand, drawn dragon, on the cover, when he heard the door chime and looked up. He saw him before Riley did. Dressed in a sleek jacket and expensive shoes, the man walked in like he still owned the room. Caleb recognized the type instantly. Charming on the surface, calculating beneath, and when Riley turned from the donation shelf and her expression froze mid-smile, Caleb knew exactly who he was. "Riley," the man said, his voice smooth, performative.
Wow, wow. It's been what?
Riley straightened, her shoulders tensing. "Aaron." He glanced around the bookstore like he was grading it. "Still doing this whole book thing? That's cute." Caleb took a step forward, not saying a word yet. He didn't need to. Aaron's eyes flicked to him, a smirk forming. "And you are..." Caleb extended a hand with practiced calm. Caleb. Aaron took it, his grip just tight enough to try and provoke. Nice watch. Riley stepped between them slightly. What do you want, Aaron? Aaron shrugged. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd drop in. See if you've bounced back yet. She didn't flinch, but Caleb saw the way her fingers curled slightly. I see you've moved on, Aaron continued, glancing at Caleb. Tech guy, right? One of those app billionaires. Or am I mixing you up with someone else? Caleb smiled, but there was steel behind it. You're not wrong. Aaron let out a low whistle. Well, Riley, I guess you finally upgraded. That's enough, Caleb said, quietly but firmly. Aaron turned toward the door, clearly satisfied with the effect he thought he'd left. Good luck with the books, he said with a wave, and disappeared into the afternoon. The silence that followed felt sharp. Riley exhaled slowly and turned away from the door. I'm sorry you had to see that, she murmured, moving back behind the counter. Caleb followed her, voice low. You don't have to apologize for someone else's cowardice. She looked at him then. You ever wonder what it says about me? That I believed him? No, Caleb said without hesitation. I wonder how he convinced himself he deserved you in the first place. She gave a small, brittle laugh, but her eyes shimmered. I thought I'd moved on completely. But when he walked in, I felt like I was right back there, broke, embarrassed, stupid. You were never stupid, Caleb said gently. You were trusting. That's not the same thing. She nodded slowly, her voice a whisper. I just hate that part of me still shakes when I see him. Caleb reached across the counter and took her hand, grounding it with his own. Maybe that's not fear. Maybe it's just your heart remembering what not to fall for again. She looked down at their hands, then back up at him. You really think so? I know so, he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Later that evening, when the bookstore was empty again, Caleb watched Riley move through the space like it was her armor and her sanctuary all at once. He thought about how far she'd come. Not just from Aaron, but from the fear that had clung to her for years. And he knew something with sudden, aching clarity. This woman had rebuilt herself from the rubble, and she'd done it without bitterness, without vengeance, without losing the softness that made her who she was. She had chosen grace over and over. And in doing so, she had become something extraordinary. Caleb didn't tell her that night, didn't interrupt her quiet routine to say the words stacking behind his ribs. He just stayed, swept the floor, shelved the returns, and when she turned the lights off, he walked her home in the falling dusk, their hands brushing, until they simply folded into each other like they belonged. She never said thank you. She didn't have to. He already knew. The weeks that followed moved quietly, like pages in a well-loved book. The foundation grew, not with fanfare but with steady purpose. Each day, someone walked through the doors of True North carrying a story they hadn't planned to share. And Riley listened. She had a way of making people feel like their stories mattered, like they weren't just footnotes in a world too busy to care. Caleb watched her, often in stillness, always in awe. She had this gentleness that wasn't weakness, it was intention. She chose kindness, again and again, even when it wasn't easy. And slowly, she began letting Caleb into more of her life, not just the neat parts, but the corners where the pain still lived. One Thursday, they sat at a long wooden table reviewing new applications. Riley had insisted they handwrite all approvals. Typed letters feel like bills. She'd said, sliding a pen toward Caleb, people deserve more than a generic signature. He smiled, picking up the pen. You realize I haven't handwritten anything since my first stock acquisition. Well, she replied, Today you're writing to a school janitor who turned a bag full of cash and got fired for it. So make it count. He did. Slowly. Carefully. And when he was done, she looked at the letter and nodded once. You're learning. You're a relentless teacher, he teased. That's one way to put it. They fell into a rhythm, her grounding the foundation with heart, him supporting it with strategy. Riley created new outreach programs, community dinners, mentorship for teen volunteers, reading days at shelters. Caleb connected them with partners, secured sustainable funding, but insisted on keeping the organization small and personal. Every face mattered. Every story counted. One morning, Riley found him on the office balcony with a cup of coffee in hand, staring out over the city. You okay? She asked, stepping beside him. He nodded, then turned to her with something vulnerable in his eyes. I spent so long trying to build something that impressed people. Now, I just want to build something that feels honest. She didn't say anything at first, just rested her hand lightly on his arm. You already are. Their connection deepened, not through grand declarations, but through the kind of quiet presence that said more than words. She brought him tea when he stayed late. He left her notes in the margins of books. Some were funny, others thoughtful, one that just said, You make this world softer. She found it tucked inside a copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. One Saturday afternoon, they hosted an event at a community center in a part of town long forgotten by city maps. It was nothing fancy. Folding chairs, warm food, laughter bouncing off cracked walls. Barn, food, laughter bouncing off cracked walls. But it was real. Riley moved through the crowd with ease, hugging a woman who'd once lived in her car and now taught literacy classes, high-fiving a boy who'd returned a lost phone and used his reward money to buy notebooks for his class. Caleb stood near the back, talking to a man who had spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The man had recently received a True North grant to start a small bicycle repair business. You people, the man said, voice thick with emotion. You didn't ask me to prove I was worth it. You just saw me. Caleb smiled, a lump forming in his throat. We all need to be seen. Later that night, back at the bookstore, Riley sat cross-legged on the floor, organizing a box of donated poetry collections. Caleb leaned against a bookshelf, watching her, the soft glow of overhead lights tracing her silhouette. You do realize, he said quietly, what we're building, it wouldn't exist without you. She looked up, a curl falling over her cheek. It wouldn't exist without you either. He stepped closer, crouching beside her. But you gave it soul. She tilted her head, studying him, and you gave it a future. They sat like that side by side, the old bookstore surrounding them in warmth and history. Outside, the street hummed with quiet traffic. Inside, something else hummed. Possibility, belonging. I never imagined a life like this, Riley said after a while. Me neither, Caleb whispered. But I don't want anything else. And in that moment, surrounded by books and stories and the heartbeat of a foundation born from a single act of honesty, they knew they had already created something rare. A life stitched together by purpose, trust, and the kind of love that didn't need to be loud to be profound. The trouble started quietly, as it often does. A blurry photo posted to a gossip site with a headline that screamed louder than the truth ever could. Tate billionaire's romance with local bookstore girl. Peep her ploy or passion. At first, Riley ignored it. She had no interest in feeding the machine. But the story grew teeth overnight. Other outlets picked it up, twisting details, making wild assumptions. One even claimed she'd auditioned for a reality show that never aired. Her inbox filled with questions she didn't owe answers to. Strangers dissected her life in comment threads and inbox DMs, calling her a gold digger, a fake, a charity case. At first, Caleb tried to contain it the way he'd always handled chaos, strategically. He drafted statements, arranged meetings with his PR team, offered to get ahead of it with a formal press release. Riley just watched him work, her eyes hollow, lips pressed together. "I don't want a PR campaign," she said finally. "I just want to protect you," he answered. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Then trust me when I say I don't need to be rescued. I just need to be believed." The rift wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It came with long silences over shared coffee, with the way Riley pulled her hand back a little too fast when their fingers brushed, with the way Caleb stayed later at the office, unsure if he was giving her space or simply afraid of the answer she hadn't spoken yet. She stopped attending events, stopped opening her inbox. She buried herself in books and old projects, answering questions from Foundation members with calm, practiced poise, but the light behind her eyes had dulled. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. One night, he walked into the bookstore just after closing. The lights were dim, the rain tapping gently against the front windows. Riley sat on the floor between the shelves, organizing a stack of secondhand poetry books, like they were the only things in the world that made sense anymore. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. She looked up, startled. "For what?" "For trying to fix it with noise," he said, kneeling beside her. "For thinking that if we made the right statements, the world would suddenly see what I already know." "And what's that?" she asked, tired. "That you're real," he said. "That you didn't fall into my life for the press, or the name, or the money. That you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen a man, not a brand." She didn't answer. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn paperback. The Little Prince. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it slowly, flipping through the front pages. A folded piece of stationery was tucked inside. She glanced at him, then unfolded it. It wasn't typed. It wasn't branded. It was a letter. Just a man writing to a woman he loved. "Riley, Riley, I can't erase what people say. I can't undo the noise. But I can tell you this. I never expected you. I didn't expect to find someone who would see me without filters, who would teach me that love is built in quiet moments and small choices. You didn't need to choose me, and that's why I'll never stop choosing you." She blinked, tears threatening, but didn't let them fall. He watched her carefully. "I didn't write it for the world. I wrote it for you." Riley closed the book slowly and set it in her lap. "You should share it," she said after a beat. He looked confused. "What?" "Let them read it," she said. "All of it. Word for word." He shook his head. "Riley, it's personal." "I know," she interrupted gently. "And maybe that's exactly what people need to see. Not a brand. Not a brand. Not a headline. But the truth." The next morning, Caleb posted the letter. No caption. No hashtags. No hashtags. No edits. Just the letter as it was. It went viral, not because of his name, but because of its honesty. Because in a world so loud with performance, someone had dared to speak quietly and meant every word. That night, Riley sat beside him on the bookstore step, their shoulders touching, the city breathing quietly around them. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I just didn't want to be a story someone else wrote." "You aren't," he said, taking her hand. "You're the story I'm learning to tell, right?" And this time, she didn't pull away. It was a Wednesday morning, gray and soft, the kind of morning that held its breath. Riley stood behind the bookstore counter, scanning in a stack of used novels when her phone vibrated with a single text from Caleb. She stared at it for a moment, then smiled without thinking. The message simply read, "Are you free Saturday at 8 a.m.? No suits allowed?" She replied, in kind, "Only if there's tea." Saturday arrived with a crisp breeze and a sky washed in pale gold. Caleb stood on the corner of Maple and 4th in a gray hoodie and jeans, a little out of place but comfortable in it. In his hand was a small paper bag holding 2 steamed buns and the nervous energy of someone about to revisit something sacred. Riley was already there when he arrived, perched on the bookstore steps, with her sleeves pushed up and her hair tucked into a messy braid. She looked up, smiled, and held out a second cup of soy milk. "You remembered," he said, taking it. "Barely," she replied, teasing. "I almost brought Cal smoothies just to test your loyalty." They started the day the way they had the last time. Wandering the morning market, weaving through rows of produce and spices and scuffed-up tables selling mismatched dishes. Riley moved with purpose and playfulness, slipping extra fruit to wide-eyed kids and haggling with vendors, not because she needed to, but because it made them laugh. Caleb followed easily this time, more at home in her world. He handed over change, accepted paper bags filled with pastries and laughter, and didn't once check his phone. When she offered him a strange, sweet-smelling drink in a clear plastic cup, he didn't even ask what it was. He just drank, grimaced, and said, "Tastes like regret and lavender." She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her bag. After breakfast, they stopped by the library again. Riley introduced Caleb to the kids' corner librarian as her reading buddy, and he spent the next hour reshelving picture books and pretending not to beam when Riley read aloud to a group of children sprawled across beanbags. In the afternoon, they visited the shelter again. Riley was greeted like family, and Caleb, less of a stranger now, was met with smiles and high fives. One of the younger boys tugged at his sleeve, wordlessly holding out a wrinkled drawing of a dragon with crooked wings. Caleb crouched down, took the picture gently, and whispered, "This is better than anything I've ever built." The boy beamed and stuck a sticker on Caleb's jacket in response. Later, they sat on the sidewalk curb outside the shelter, eating sticky rice wrapped in banana leaves and passing a bottle of orange soda between them. The sun began to dip low, stretching the shadows and painting the street in amber. Riley leaned back on her hands, eyes closed against the light. "I used to think love had to be loud," she said, voice thoughtful, "that it had to prove itself with big gestures and dramatic moments." Caleb turned to her, and now, she opened her eyes slowly, looked at him. "Now, I think love is just being seen, completely, and still being wanted." He swallowed hard, heart full. "You know," he said, voice low, "you returned a lost wallet, but you took something with you." She raised a brow, amused. "Oh yeah, what did I take?" He touched his chest lightly. "Hope." She didn't respond right away. But after a long beat, she smiled. A real one. The kind that reached the quiet corners of her face, that softened the air between them. And in that smile, Caleb saw everything he had ever wanted to believe about people. About second chances. About love that didn't just show up, but stayed. As the sun slid behind the rooftops and the shadows stretched farther down the block, they sat there on the curb, 2 people who had once been strangers. 2 people who had built something gentle and fierce between them, not with grand words or perfect timing, but with grand words or perfect timing, but with presence, with trust, with choice. She reached over and took his hand, her fingers sliding between his with ease. No speeches, no promises, just this. And for Caleb Westwood, a man who had once measured success in stock prices and square footage, that moment on the curb with Riley Morgan, their hands tangled and laughter still echoing in the air, was the richest thing he'd ever known. The little bookstore on Oak Street looked different now, not drastically, but meaningfully. The walls had been repainted a warm honey gold. the shelves polished until they gleamed with a kind of lived-in love. Plants hung from sunlit corners in ceramic pots Riley had collected from thrift stores. The back section, once dusty and forgotten, was transformed into a cozy reading nook filled with mismatched bean bags, donated blankets, and a wooden sign above it that read, "Take one, leave one." But at its heart, the place was still the same. Still hers. Still theirs. A full year had passed since she returned a lost wallet and accidentally rewrote the story of her life. And today, the bookstore buzzed with gentle celebration. There were no press releases, no red carpets. No press releases, no red carpets. Just laughter, the scent of cinnamon rolls from the bakery next door, and the warmth of people who had been touched by something real. Riley stood near the front, wearing a soft blue sweater, her sleeves rolled up as she poured tea into paper cups. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on faces she knew by heart. A former teacher who used her grant to launch a reading program, the quiet janitor who now worked at a community garden, the teenage girl who had once been too shy to speak and now ran poetry circles after school. Caleb was beside her, more relaxed than anyone had ever seen him in public. No suit, just a sweater and jeans, his grin unshakable as he chatted with a group of volunteers. He looked completely at ease, like a man who had finally stepped into a life that didn't require armor. There were no speeches, no formal ceremony, just honest conversation, shared stories, and the comfort of being seen. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting amber light across the wooden floors, the crowd started to thin. Volunteers cleared plates, children curled up in the reading nook with books twice their size, and the soft crackle of an old jazz record filled the space. Caleb slipped away for a moment, then returned with a small, weathered book in his hands. Riley looked up as he approached, brushing flour from her palms on a dish towel. "Find a new favorite?" she asked. "Maybe an old one," he said, handing it to her. She took it and turned it over in her hands. The Little Prince. The spine was cracked, the pages worn at the edges. "Open it," he said softly. She flipped through the first few pages and froze as a small velvet box tumbled into her palm. Her breath caught. Her eyes snapped up to meet his, wide and stunned. Caleb's voice was quiet but steady. "I wanted to do this here, where it began." She opened the box slowly. Inside was a delicate sapphire ring set in rose gold. Simple, elegant, timeless. He looked nervous, but grounded. "I spent so long being afraid," he said, his voice catching just slightly. "Afraid people would only see me for what I had. Afraid to be real. But then you came along. And you didn't ask for anything. You just gave." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak. "You saw me before you even knew my name," he continued. "And now, I want to spend the rest of my life seeing you, learning you, loving you." He cleared his throat, exhaled, steadied his voice again. "I don't know what chapter this is, but I know I want to write every page with you." Riley blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. He let out a breathless laugh. "Ideally." She nodded, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Yes." There was no applause, not yet. Just silence. And joy. And two people clinging to each other in a quiet corner of the world they had created together. But outside, the rain had begun to fall. The gentle kind, soft and silver, the kind that doesn't chase people away but draws them closer. It pattered against the windows like a memory returning. Later, when the guests had gone and the bookstore lights glowed like lanterns in the mist, Riley stood barefoot on the steps, the rain dotting her dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Caleb stood in front of her, soaked and smiling. He dropped to one knee on the stone step, where she had once stood with a wallet in her hand and the world on her shoulders. I didn't get it right the first time, he said. I started with fear, with silence. But everything I know about love, I've learned from you. She knelt down too, cupping his face. I'm not afraid of loving the wrong person anymore, she whispered. I'm just afraid of walking away from the right one. And with the rain falling like a quiet blessing and the world spinning softly around them, they made a promise, not just of forever, but of presence, of honesty, of choosing each other again and again, even when it was hard. Especially then. Their story didn't begin with a kiss. It began with a choice. And it would be written, page by page, in love that never needed to shout to be heard. Life lesson from Riley and Caleb's story. Sometimes, the smallest choices reveal the truest parts of who we are. Riley didn't return Caleb's wallet for applause or reward. She did it because it was the right thing to do, even when no one was looking. And that single, quiet act of integrity became the doorway to something extraordinary. This story reminds us that kindness doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand anything in return. But it matters. In a world often driven by noise, performance, and transaction, honesty still has the power to change lives. Starting with our own. We also learn that love, real, deep, lasting love, doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. It comes in the form of showing up, listening, choosing someone even when it's hard. Caleb had every reason to hide behind his success, but he chose vulnerability. Riley had every reason to protect her heart, but she chose to open it again. Together, they built a relationship grounded in truth, patience, and purpose. So if you're feeling small or unseen, remember, the right choice is never wasted. Even if no one notices today, you'll know. And one day, maybe someone else will see the light you've been quietly carrying all along. Thank you for being here and for believing in stories that speak to the soul. If this one touched your heart, let us know where you're tuning in from in the comments. We love hearing from you. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales of hope, healing, and real love. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind and stay true.